Thank you guys so much for coming. It's such a pleasure. Father Paul is in from New York. He is a priest with Heart's Home. It's an international Catholic community that builds communities in cities all over the world where people, young people between like, I don't know, in their 20s, whatever. I haven't done one of these talks in so long. Can go and volunteer and just spend up to 2 years giving their lives to the people they're living in community with, and to spread a charism of compassion to those people. Erica was in Brazil for 2 years. I was in Vienna for 2 years, and we met in training with Father Paul in New York. And so it's such a pleasure to have Father Paul here to share the charism of Heart's Home with us, and also his main work in New York, which is outreach and friendship with the artists there in Chelsea and Williamsburg and Brooklyn.
No, so we just were really excited that he was going to be able to be here. He's here for a gallery opening tomorrow, and so Mary Louise and I have been wanting to do something for a really long time with our friends here in LA. And so we were like, well, let's just have a little gathering at the house, something really small. And that's kind of at the heart of Heart's Home too, is small gatherings where we can join in community and in fellowship. And so we're really happy that you could join us tonight and hear something that's very close to all of our hearts that Father Paul shares with us. So enjoy.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Mary Louise, for hosting this session and for organizing it with Erica. Thanks to all of you for coming. And so, that's what I came to talk about, art and compassion. Just to give you a little bit of background, how I came to, that's what I do now full-time, ministering to artists in New York, among many other things that I do, including in Japan, etc. But, and really for me, compassion is what came first, and art was sort of a calling within the calling. I've been with Heart's Home, so this group where Eric and Mary also did missions with, for 17 years now. My first mission was in Brazil, same place, or close to where Erica was. And so, the charism of Heart's Home, the spirituality, is that idea of compassion, that is, that the deepest need, deepest longing of the human heart is that of a presence. And so the Heart's Homes are small houses where we reach out to people, but we don't give money, we don't catechize people, we don't have a food pantry, we don't have anything to give except for our presence. So that's what we do. Like every afternoon we'd go out, whether it be in the slums or same thing in Brooklyn, and we visit people who are homebound, we visit people in jail, visit people in hospital, but just so they can feel that they feel loved, we spend time with them, which sometimes may mean, especially if we're in Brazil, it may mean spending a whole afternoon playing soccer with the kids, or sitting down with elderly people watching a novella, or whatever it takes for the friendship to happen, the encounter to happen. And then from there, of course, we'll do anything a friend would do for his or her friend, so we get very active as well, but always with that focus on friendship. And for me, art came in only later, in 2008, really, when I moved to New York. So in New York too, much of our work is centered around the housing projects. We're based, there's 7 of us living in the housing projects in Brooklyn, Fort Greene, some of you know Brooklyn. And we visit a lot of homebound people, we visit a shelter, a couple of nursing homes, a hospital, and we built quite a large network with people who are very, have a lot of problems. Also in a psychiatric hospital, we're talking about a psychiatric hospital. And so that's the way it started. And then we're starting to meet artists. But really, it didn't start as a project. We never decided, let's do something with artists in New York. But even before I came, they started meeting some artists, probably not very different here in Los Angeles, but in New York, it's, you meet artists everywhere. Like if you go, any bar you go to, you're gonna be served by artists or singers or Broadway guys or painters. And really this the way art came into the calling to compassion is that first we figured out that there was a lot of need in that particular community, which in New York is a huge community, several 100,000. It's difficult to know exactly how many people define themselves as artists. And among visual artists, especially among painters, that's what I do most, is visiting painters and sculptors. A lot of loneliness, that, I mean, some of you probably know what it is to work very hard and not have, some of them get maybe like a small group show every other year, or, not much recognition, of course, not much also financial results from their work. So there's a lot of challenges to the fact of being an artist. And so when we understood that, we started taking it more seriously to, maybe we said, maybe it's not just about the shelters and the nursing homes, maybe there a community that could use a little presence and community and support. So I came to New York in 2008 to start this ministry. And at the time we didn't really know if it would work, how there's not many Catholic among artists, not many practicing people. And all of my friends are not Catholic or Christian, so we didn't really know how they would respond. So we decided to try to see, and the response was very positive. So I started doing studio visits, meeting artists at open studios, openings, and then whenever I felt there was a true encounter and interest, then sort of the friendship built up organically from that encounter. And so I would say that at the beginning it was the recognition that there was a suffering that was specific to artists. And then it became that, and even more than that, that is the understanding that many artists, not all of them, but many artists had truly a sense of compassion in their work, built in their work, but a sense of people suffering, might be the suffering of the local community, might be a counter with the suffering of what's going on in the Middle East or somewhere, or loneliness, and often to sort of an attempt to respond to that suffering, a desire to respond to that suffering through their work, the desire to do something. And I met some artists, which I will introduce tonight, who kind of successfully created a body of work that sort of flowed from their compassion and flowed from that concern for the world suffering. And I also met a lot of artists for whom it was just a question, in front of so much suffering, in front of so many dramas happening all over the world, and having the question, what do I do with my work? Am I just being so selfish that I'm just spending a lot of time in my studio doing my little thing, expressing my little feeling, or how can I respond to that? How can I connect to that experience, to that suffering? And that I met in many, many artists. Sometimes this question is so strong and so dramatic that it would push them almost all the way to completely abandoning everything, their art, and turning to something else. But that question, and that's so this ministry that we started is also a way to accompany, to help them find an answer to that question. So I want to, of course, this talk won't be an answer to that question, but I want to introduce you to some of the artists who've been very helpful for me to understand that, to understand how artists can be compassionate, if the computer accepts to awake from his. So some of the artists I'll talk about are living artists whom I met and got to know in New York, and others I never met, but I feel also that they're like friends. And this is one of them. You probably know Tarkovsky, the Russian filmmaker. This is one of his first movies, Andrei Rublev. And this was really a movie even before I became a piece, probably like some 10 or 15 years ago. really, I would say it's the first movie that sort of hooked me to art, and especially to this relationship between art and compassion. And the story of the movie, so Tarkovsky is sort of making a movie about the life of Andrei Rublev, who was an icon painter from 15th century Russia. We don't know much about his life, but there's one thing that is known, is that he stopped working for many years. We don't know how many exactly, I think a period of 10 years or 15 years, like he produced no work at all. And all his masterpieces, including the Trinity, which we'll see later on, were produced after that period of silence, long silence. So, not trying to be historical or anything, but Tarkovsky just gave his own personal interpretation of why he went into that long period of silence, and why is it that when he came out of his silence, he created this most beautiful work, which is really famous for. And the story he tells is that at one point, this Andrei Rublev, who's a monk, an icon painter, believes in beauty very much, believes that people's heart, everybody's heart is longing for beauty, that he's doing a good thing. And he abruptly comes to terms with the reality of evil. That the city is completely destroyed by Tatars, allied with some Russian people. The church is burned, as you can see. A lot of killings going on, and he himself, in the heat of the action, kills another Russian man. So after that experience, that's the scene of the movie. So next day, the city is quiet, everything is burned down, and he decides to take a vow of silence. He said, I thought that the human heart was good and made for beauty, but I realized that I was misled, mistaken, and that evil is so deeply rooted in humanity that to create beauty would be a lie. Like, to create beauty would just be to create an illusion, and I don't want to lie to people, so I may as well stop creating anything beautiful. So he takes his vow of silence, and then we can move on to the next image. And the drama will be a result at the end of the movie. The last maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the movie is a scene that revolves not around Rublev himself, but around this boy, Boris something. You see this is a bell behind him, and the Tsar wants a bell to be made in his honor, to ring as a sign of his power, of his victory. So they go to a village where the bell makers lived, but only to find out that everybody died, that there was a disease, there was an epidemic, and everybody died. Only this child is alive. And he says, but take me, I will make a bell for you. Before dying, my father gave me the secret of how to make bells. I know exactly how to make them, so believe me, I'll do that bell for you. But what we find out later is actually he is lying. That is, his father died without giving him the secret. And he's extremely upset against his father. He doesn't know how to make a bell. He doesn't know the quantity of gold, the quantity of this, quantity of that. He has no idea. So what he's doing is that he's bidding his whole life on this bell. Because, if he doesn't do it, then he's going to die. I mean, he's in this village. Everybody died. He's alone. And then he's going to make the bell. If it doesn't ring well, that is, if you don't get the exact quantity of the different metals, if it doesn't ring well, if it ends up being a failure, then the Tsar will kill him. So he kind of bids his whole existence on making this bell, which he makes. And the last scene is when they ring the bell, so it's very dramatic, because you don't know what's going to come out of it, and then it rings beautifully. And the next scene, which is the last scene of the movie, is Rublev, who comes down to the boy. Rublev has been in the background, has been following what was going on, and he comes to the boy, embraces him. The boy sort of collapsed of exhaustion. And at this point in the movie is when Rublev's interior drama is resolved, because he understands that the artist can't create beauty because beauty doesn't come from him. Like, this kid could make a bell that rang beautifully without having the secret. And it sort of acts as a metaphor for the artist. Like, the artist doesn't hold the secret of what he's doing. He's doing something which he doesn't really know where it comes from, doesn't come from him, comes from beyond him. And for that reason, he starts believing in art again, because it doesn't precisely, maybe we're evil, maybe we're broken, maybe we're corrupt, but in art, we kind of channel into the world something that comes from beyond us. So we can move it. That's a quote by Andrei Tarkovsky explaining what he tried to do in this movie, where he says this was the theme of Andrei Rublev. It looks at first sight as if the cruel truth of life, as he observes it, is in crying contradiction with the harmonious ideal of his work. The crux of the question, however, is that the artist cannot express the moral ideal of his time unless he touches all its running source, unless he suffers and lives this source himself. And that's the icon that Andrei Rublev is mostly famous for, which was painted after this long period of silence, the Trinity. Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah. So, and then the second artist I would like to talk about, which of course is very well known, is Mark Rothko. It was very important for me. I was getting to the end of my studies in Rome in 2008, getting ready actually to move to New York, and there was a big retrospective of Mark Rothko in Rome, which I mean, back then I didn't even know the name of Mark Rothko. That's how well trained I am in art. I never studied art. But somebody told me, oh, there's this going on in Rome, you should really go. It was the last day, it was Sunday, it was the last day, so there was a long line going, down the street. But I said, well, if I gotta go, and I was there. So I waited for like an hour and a half, whatever it took, to get to see the exhibition. And this really, this was a revelation for me. Both of the, like a two-sided revelation really, because I was extremely moved by the beauty of Rothko, the beauty of the paintings he did in the 40s and the 50s. Rothko said he wanted to achieve in painting what has been achieved a long time ago already in music, that kind of very deep emotion, very profound emotion, metaphysical emotion. And there's actually a quote from Mozart where he says that you can look at his whole work, Mozart's work, as the attempt to find two knots that would love each other. He said, all my work is about finding two knots that would really love each other. And I think it's very similar to what Rothko has been trying to do, and doing successfully in a certain period, bringing, from his early like subway scenes and more figurative work, and then it had different periods, but it sort of progressively simplified into just finding, there's three here, but it came into just having two colors and just bringing them together and trying to find two colors that would truly love each other. That's simple fact of the relationship. But then we can move to the next picture. What also was a very strong experience seeing that exhibition. I mean, you probably know Rothko's work, some of you do, and the more you go into from the 40s to the 50s and the 50s to the 60s, and it becomes darker and darker. Black is always at the top, that's what he says in a letter to, I don't remember where he says that, but black is always at the top. So his painting is sort of invaded by that obscure presence. And I got a couple of quotes from an artist that we look into more depth later on, Schansky. I think the sight confirmed what he already knew, that the edges of the world and everything in it are blurred by mystery of sadness. That's a text that Schansky wrote about Mark Rothko. And you can move on, probably is another quote from Schansky. Nothing in Rothko is hard, nothing is secure, nothing is definite. He works sadly and constantly against the dying of his own light. And that's really what you see when you see a big retrospective of Rothko, and you walk through the galleries, and you really see that it is that he works sadly and constantly against the dying of his own light. But there's something dying in Rothko, and his paintings grew increasingly dark until the last period, the 60s, when it becomes like black on black, and you wonder where where has the color gone, where has the light gone, why did it all disappear, and move on. And it all culminated in his very last work, which is the Rothko Chapel, which was inaugurated in 1971, 1 year after the suicide of Rothko. So he never see it opening, even though he was so excited by this work, worked very hard on it, but committed suicide before seeing it. So the next artist I would like to talk about was the first artist that I got to meet in New York when I moved in 2008. So I had still all these questions about Rothko and why did it have to go into such darkness, and why could somebody who has created such beautiful paintings, who seems to have approached the vision of beauty so close, why would he lose it all and commit suicide? For me, that was a big mystery. Could anything be done to stop that, to stop the dying of his own light and the dying of Rothko? And the first artist I met, I was at an open studio in Dumbo, which back then, New York is a fast-moving city. I don't know about here, but Dumbo was, we're talking about 7 years ago, so it's like talking about ages, but it was just 7 years ago. There was a lot of artists in Dumbo, and now they were all being priced out. I mean, it's like everywhere else. And I went to this open studio, and I would go from studio to studio, and the last studio I went into on the 6th floor of this big building on 68 J Street, just under sort of between the two bridges in Dumbo, was a studio of a Japanese artist who wasn't there on that day. It was his wife. She's an artist too, and they share a studio. And I was really moved by what I saw. The whole studio was filled with depiction of the Pietà. Some of them very figurative, like this one here. Sometimes it's just that one figure standing, burned or broken. Some of them were a lot more abstract, like made of clay, made of bronze. But the whole studio was all about the Pietà. And later on, I got to meet him. So that's Masaru Bando and his wife Rika. So she's in New York almost a whole year. He's mostly in Japan, in Hokkaido, and comes to New York 2 or 3 times a year. And I got to become really good friend with both of them. And so I asked him how he came, why would he represent the Pietà? And it took several years before he told me the story that his brother committed suicide. His brother was an artist as well, lived in Japan, and they had a lot of issues. I think he and his brother, they didn't talk to each other much. But when his brother died, it took a long time before anybody found out that he had died, because he was not married. His brother was not married, didn't have kids. So, and he sort of blamed his brother. He said he had a miserable life, a miserable death. He'd done a lot of things he'd done wrong, and he was not very compassionate, to say the least, towards his brother back then. But then their mother, he couldn't understand why she always was so patient towards his brother, so loving towards him during his life, and then when he died. And that becomes sort of a mystery. How could she keep carrying him all that time? And he thought it was something beautiful, but he couldn't understand. He couldn't participate in that relationship that she had with his brother. So the image that helped him understand that was Michelangelo's Pietà in Rome. So he actually moved to Rome, rent a studio in Rome just to study the Pietà, the one that's in Rome, and then the one that's in Florence, and the Rondani, which is in Milan. And the rest of his life has been dedicated to that work, to the Pietà. And he also told me actually that thing to say that he really sort of reconsidered later the way he looked at his brother. He said, for me too, when I was in my 40s, no exhibitions, nobody interested in my work. You know, when you've been working for 20 years on something and still don't get any feedback, any recognition, you really wonder if not just wasting your whole existence. And he told me, if it were not for my wife, I would have done the same thing. You know, he said she always believed in me, she always accompanied me, she always encouraged me. If it were not for her, I would have done the same. So that's one of his pietas that is in his studio. This one is bronze. It's actually very, very small. So you see some of his work. If you don't know it's a pieta, you would hardly recognize it. But I put this the other one by Gerhard David, the next one, which is 15th century, 16th century work. Just you see, I mean, it's very similar, the composition with the arm holding the body of Jesus and then his arm folding. So if we can go back to the previous pieta, that's the way he represented it. And that's another pieta, Descent from the Cross by Marc Chagall, with his wife Bella here, sort of receiving the body here, and he being taken down from the cross. It's actually himself, so that's Chagall represented himself as crucified, and then the angel, which is very interesting, the angel is coming down and bringing him the instrument of his art, which echoes a traditional representation of the Passion, where there's some angel carrying the instruments of the Passion, so the spear, all the different the nails, etc. Except that there it's the instrument of art. And for Chagall, there was it was part of an exhibition that was at the Jewish Museum of Art in New York 4 or 5 years ago, that was dedicated only to his crucifixions, which was we know the white crucifixion, which is one of his most famous, but he represented the crucifixion many times, and often he represents himself as the crucified, and sort of echoes the situation of Masaru Bando, who was saying how much he relied on his wife for carrying it along with his vocation as an artist, because for Chagall too, you know, his wife is always there to be with him. Like, his wife's compassion was a big part of his existence. And also, 1941, so it was during the war, Chagall could almost miraculously leave Europe, so some connections that they had. I mean, he left Europe right at the beginning of war, so he was in New York, he was safe, but it was a huge suffering for him to know of everything that was going on, to all the suffering that his people was going through in Europe, and for him to be safe in New York, and he felt like he would have wanted some way to help, some way to participate in that suffering. And what this painting and other ones reveal is that for him, art was his way to participate, to embrace that suffering, to listen to that suffering, to embrace it, and also to respond to it, and to show the beauty of his people, the suffering of his people, and to bring some consolation through art to his people. And that's a poem that he wrote the same period. It's called The Painter Crucified, and he reads, "Every day I carry a cross, they push me and drag me by the hand. Already the dark of night surrounds me. You have deserted me, my God. Why? I ran upstairs to my dry brushes, and I am crucified like Christ, fixed with nail to the easel." So you see how he brings this whole image of the Passion into his own work as an artist. And also when he says, "You have deserted me, my God," like this me, it's Chagall, but it's also the whole Jewish people. So art became his way for him to be identified to the suffering of his people in Europe. So another artist that I would like to talk about is this man, Jörg Madlener. This picture was taken 2 weeks ago today. It was an opening at of a show I curated in New York. I recently started to create shows at the Gallery of First Things. I don't know if you know, it's a magazine, and they have a gallery as part of their offices in Manhattan. And this was the first show I curated. And this man here I also met in 2008, summer of 2008, right when I came in New York. He has a house right next to the ICCC. That's how we met. And so his name is Jörg Madlener. He's in his 70s, and he's a man who has come from a very difficult background, like you would get most German people his age. That is, their parents were part of the Nazis. His father was one of the biggest surgeons for the Nazis, and he told me what he would accompany his father, and so he was between 5 and 10 years old, got to see, and when you accompany a surgeon during the war, I mean, whatever side you're on, it's you're going to see a lot of horrible things. And I mean, both, you will see in his painting, both the surgery, that is an approach to the human body where the body is just wounded, just blood, just open flesh, and also in his work he had to deal with the like all German artists his age, to deal with the ideology, which is also a way to there's so other ideologies to deny transcendence, like deny the absolute value of the human being. And so his whole work, his whole existence has been devoted to that, to the human face. That's what he paints, human face. Been painting human faces for over 50 years. He was a private student of orthotics, which doesn't really show in his work. You know, somebody at the opening said it's, because somebody said you wouldn't tell that he was a student of orthotics because orthotics is a master in uglification, which is some truth in it. And his work, some of his work really show the human suffering, but never ugliness. He always wants to show the beauty, show the humanity of the person he represents. And so we can move on. That's one of the paintings in the show. The show is called The Jordanian Woman. He's been painting over the past 2 years one model who lives in Abu Dhabi, a Jordanian woman, Suhair. Has done over 300 works just of her face. And they're very, very different. You wouldn't, of course, recognize her, or you wouldn't know that there's different paintings from the same person. But in this particular painting, you can see how much he, I mean, some of the paintings really show the suffering, the wounds, the flesh, but always with this attempt to let the face emerge, but not in a dogmatic way. So some very interesting conversations that we had together. He said back in the Renaissance, for instance, they could paint a human face, they could draw a human face, paint a human face easily, because there was a lot of certitude about what a human being is. I mean, you would go back like 300, 400 years before our time, and you would ask somebody, what is a human being? And they would say, that's not a big problem. We know, created by God in God's likeness and made for relationship, community, political animal, whatever. But people had a lot of, not just knowledge, but certitude about what a human being is and supposed to be and what our vocation is. And nowadays it's clearly not the case anymore. It's just, what is a human being? Then we all kind of wrestle with that question. What exactly are we? And faced with all the sufferings that we've seen in the 20th century and now 21st century, the question just gets more and more difficult to answer. And so his work really deals with that, and that's what he says. You cannot easily draw a human being nowadays because you cannot easily know who we are. I mean, our identity is just so confused. So to paint a face is to caress it 1,000 times. Jörg, that's one thing he told me as we prepared the exhibition. To paint a face is to caress it 1,000 times. And it's really decided for him to approach the human being, to approach that. The suffering through painting is a way to bring consolation, like a way to caress the human face 1,000 times. Like you model, or whoever you're trying to paint is somebody who's wounded, is somebody who's suffering, is somebody whose identity is in crisis, and therefore when you paint that person, you have to do it in a way that's very compassionate, very tender, very respectful of the mystery of that person. And another thing he told me, there was just all that recent conversation, the model is greater than I. Levinas, I don't know if you know Levinas, he's a French philosopher. That's the kind of thing he would say, that the other, as other, is greater than I. That it's one of the philosophers, Jewish philosophers, French philosopher, 20th century, who really tried to rethink the human being, what it means to be human, and the relationship. And one thing he would say is that the other, whoever he is, wherever he's from, but the other, as other, is greater than I. That is, his mystery is something I can never fully define, fully understand. And for Jörg, it's not just a sort of an ideas, or it's really part of his work. He said when he looks at the model, for him the model is a mystery. And so that's kind of two different aspects of compassion. Is that there's an aspect of receiving the suffering, of seeing the suffering of the other and receiving it, suffering, offering hospitality in one's heart, in one's art, but also to look at the other not just as a suffering, not just as somebody struggling or somebody suffering, but also to see the other as a mystery. The model is greater than I. And so that's another painting that's in the exhibition. Still the same woman, but in that particular one, which is the first painting when you walk into the exhibition, because I didn't want people to just come in and be, in front of the most difficult and painful painting. But this one is very beautiful, and he likes to compare it with the, in Reims, in France, there's a cathedral that has an angel. It's part of many angels, but there's one. It's called the Smiling Angel, very famous. It sort of made the whole cathedral very famous, and a very similar smile. But what is amazing in his work is that these things just happen. It's not like he said, "Oh, let's paint her smiling" or something like that. It's just it works and works and works, and then the painting progressively happens. The face is sort of revealed in the act of painting. So another artist, we're going back to someone I wish I had met, but of course I never met, Alberto Giacometti, but who's also someone who's been working on the human face all his life. All his life, that's what he's been doing, sculpting or painting or drawing human, call them heads, doesn't call them face that much, but heads, human heads, trying to understand, like contemplating the mystery of what it means to be human. Not just the face, but also what makes us stand. Giacometti is famous for his like vertical figures, and for Giacometti, there's really something like sort of, I think part of the mystery of humanity is, why do we stand? Why, when there would be so many reasons to just collapse, to just give up, lose hope, why is it that we stand? And we're talking before about the spirituality of heart, zone, compassion, etc. Well, the image in the New Testament that we always come back to understand what is compassion, to sort of define compassion, is that of Mary standing at the foot of the cross, and so receiving the suffering of her son, also contemplating him not just as a suffering innocent, but also in his freedom, in his mystery. She stands in front of something greater than her, but then she stands. That's the only thing that's said, actually. It's in the Gospel of John, and the only thing he says about her is stabat. She was standing. And when I saw the movie The Passion in France, I saw it with a friend of mine who's not Catholic or anything. I remember we walked out of the theater. It takes a little bit of time before you can really talk about it because it's quite emotional. And then her question was, how could she stand? How could she be in front of such suffering of her own son and still stand and not just collapse or cry? And I think there's something of that mystery that Giacometti was really fascinated by. How can we stand? And so we can move on once more. And he said, I sculpt the human head because I want to understand why I keep failing. It's something so beautiful about Giacometti. He's so honest. It's very humble. I mean, I can't believe that his works go sold for hundreds of millions now because it's nothing was further remote from his art and from his work than making money. And he said, he said, when I started sculpture, I thought he was mostly into drawing, painting, different things. And I want to do sculpture, and he thought, I'm going to master it. It won't last long before I understand how it works, etc. And then he would turn to the camera and say, well, I've been working for like 50 years, and the result is not that good, so I keep trying. But I really love that particular, it's called the human head, because I want to understand why I keep failing, why I don't succeed. Why is it that you can't just you don't get it? You keep trying, but you don't. There's something in the human being that's always like further away. And that's text by John Berger, critic, who's still alive, even though he's in his 90s. Great critic, and he writes this about Giacometti: the content of any of Giacometti's work is an incomplete history of his staring at it. The act of looking was like a form of prayer for him. It became a way of approaching, but never being able to grasp an absolute. And that sense that the human figure is an absolute, Levinas again, and how humble Giacometti was about it. That's fine. So this is the next artist I want to talk about, Sean Scully, which is also an artist who told me so much about art and so much about compassion. This is a work, Paul, it's not me, I was 6 years old back then, and didn't know him yet, which he did in 1984 for his son Paul, who died in a car crash. And so Sean Scully, if you know his work, for the past 50 years what he's been doing is horizontal and verticals. That's what he's been doing for 50 years. And somebody asked him in an interview to say, aren't you just bored? Don't you want to move to something else? Horizontal, verticals, okay, it's fine. But he answered, the horizontal, it symbolizes the infinite horizon, and vertical is the human position in front of the infinite. So how can you get bored of this? And I think his work per se is very compassionate because he's an abstract painter, and he embraced abstraction. Why his influences are not, of course, he's very influenced by Rothko and Mondrian, but even more importantly by Matisse, and even more than Matisse by Duccio and Cimabue. So religious, figurative Renaissance painters. But he said the reason why he wanted to work in abstraction is that in the 60s, starting in the 60s, abstraction has been very often used in a way that's extremely formal. And he said it's been dehumanized. Like we've taken the soul, taken the heart out of it, just to express ideas or to express oneself, but it sort of got disconnected from human experience. And so he says, my whole attempt, like his humble attempt, is to reconnect abstraction and the human experience, to make abstraction able to express suffering, like in this painting which he did for his son Paul, who died, and also to express relationships, like using different canvases. So you see that the break in the lines here is because it's actually 3 canvases put together. So the aspect of relationship, of imperfection, of all this kind of come into his work. We can move on to the next. So that's so just after we met. So that's a painting that was exhibited in Philadelphia. He's having a really good time right now, Sean Scully. He had 12 or 13 major solo exhibitions last year, including in China, including 3 shows in China, and he has a new retrospective starting next month in different cities in China, which has never happened to any Western artist. This was part of an exhibition in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and It's part of a series which he did in 2008, was exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2008, called Walls of Light. So it's like walls, like brick walls, but when you get closer to the wall, which we're going to do with the next picture, you see that you can see like sort of between the bricks, you see the line, and I think that's what his work is really concerned with, is he builds these walls because for him a wall is it's a human structure, so he's not so much interested in the abstraction of the wall as much as in its human element, because it's abstract but it's it's man-made, and it says something, it has order, it has relationship, it has solidity, but it has fragility as well. And something he said about these walls, he said, think of my walls as if it was a house, it's very timely actually, it was a house to offer refuge for refugees, and the work is concerned not so much with the wall as much as with the life, what's going on behind the wall. As you see in that painting, you can sort of peer into the between the stones. And this echoes for me a painting by Georges de la Tour, 1645, where you see the hands, very similar to what Chanskely is doing. So the stripes, and really the wall not just as a screen, as an obstacle, but as a mediation. Like he's interested in the light behind the wall, interested in the. So there's also, like in some of the Giacometti or York Madeleine and some of these other paintings, like this research for transcendence, for something that's behind, and for the light, the light that Rothko lost and that he's trying to recover in his paintings. So we can move on. That's the same painting, full picture. And that's the most recent work by Chanskely, which I'm very excited to present. This was a work that was inaugurated in June of last year in Barcelona. Outside of Barcelona, there's a monastery called Montserrat, a very old, 1,000-year-old monastery. And Chanskely was originally introduced by his gallerist Carlos Tache to Montserrat in order to make an exhibition, to have an exhibition in their museum. They have a small, very nice museum. They have a lot of great works. But when he saw the museum, he said, of course, it's very nice, it's very cute, I love your museum, but museums, first he said, I don't really like museums, and then I had shows at the Tate, at the Met, so small museum. But he said, what I'm really interested instead is the monastery. If I could show my paintings in the monastery, and to what one of the monks said, it's a lovely idea, but then we won't allow tourists to come in the monastery. So if you show in the monastery, it's be only for us, only for the monks. So long story short, he brought him to a chapel, which is the oldest chapel built on the mountain, built in 942, 940 and 50, something like that, in those years. And Chanskely walked in and fell in love with the place, of course, 1100-year-old Romanesque chapel in Spain. First, it was the idea of a temporary exhibition, and then it became the idea of a permanent exhibition, which became Santa Cecilia. So we can move on to the next. He created paintings and sculptures for the whole chapel. And I think it's another aspect of compassion. We've been talking about that aspect of receiving the suffering, of being attentive to suffering, the aspect of also not just looking at the suffering of the other, but also beyond the suffering at the light, the mystery of transcendence. I think the true aspect of compassion also in art is that of bringing consolation, like bringing beauty. You could say, if we go back to that image of Mary standing at the foot of the cross, of course, she's there to receive the suffering of Jesus. She's like a mother, like any mother would be, next to her dying son. But she's also there to offer him her beauty, her presence, her hope, so that he can go all the way to his mission, to his gift of himself. And I think it's a big part of that compassion too, that artists not just receive that suffering, but also have something to give. And beauty is not something that is not so much in the art vocabulary today, even though it's always a little bit. But I think it's never been more contemporary. There's never been better time in history than to bring beauty. Of course, the kind of beauty that is going to be created today is very different from the kind of beauty that was created in the Renaissance or in the Middle Age. But we need like new forms to express, new vocabularies to express beauty, to express the order, to express the infinite, to express transcendence. And I think that's what Chanskely did with Santa Cecilia. This was actually, I was very blessed, very honored to say the first mass in that chapel. And it's Father Laplana, who's the monk who commissioned Montserrat, a very amazing monk, a man of silence, spends his whole day in silence. But he also has a heart for beauty, a heart for art. He is the director of the Museum of Montserrat, and there's a lot of artists, like Juan Miró was a very good friend of his, Eduardo Chillida was a very good friend of his, Bill Viola is a very good friend of his. He has all these artists coming to him, and I know Chanskely, and Chanskely is the one who introduced me to Father Laplana, which is funny because Chanskely is not a very practicing artist, but that's one of the things I'm very grateful to him for, introducing me to that man who's an extraordinary man. And I think part of the we're asking before that question of how to stand, and how, especially for an artist, facing the suffering, and sometimes with a lot more sensitivity to suffering than a lot of people would have, like we saw with Chagall, with York, engaging with suffering in a way that's, even if you're not there, even if you're not in the Middle East, if you're not in Germany when the Jews are being persecuted, they sort of still participate in it. How can you still stand? How not to just cut your wrist like Rothko, or what prevents you from just sinking into that suffering? And I think part of the answer, one aspect of the answer, is to not be alone. And for Chanskely, definitely, he had many times in his life, not just when his son died, but also he went through a lot of very difficult periods in his life. And really what was his strength is that he never was alone. He has a very strong sense of friendship. He knows exactly where his friends are, who are the people he can rely on. Like other artists, he's been working with them for the past 40 years, very faithful in friendship. And that community, and you could say that even Mary at the cross was not alone. There was John, there was Mary Magdalene, there was other people. There was not just her son and his suffering, but she had other people she could rely on. She could look at them. She could get courage and strength by looking at them and relying on them. Even certain representation of the cross, you see John standing beside Mary and holding her, actually. So she could stand, like holding her on so she wouldn't fall, collapse. And so that's also part of my ministry. And so all these artist friends from New York. This one here is a lucky one. Just moved to Hawaii last year, but the other two are still in New York. And so that's part of the ministry. So they're not Catholic, but it's to bring that sense of community, bring that sense of friendship. So we organize a lot of events in New York, and their artists get to meet. And sometimes nothing's going to happen, and sometimes something's going to happen. And sometimes they will become very good friends. And that's what we try to do, to sort of mediate those kind of encounters, that kind of community where they can then support each other, help each other. And the last artist I would like to talk about is Makoto Fujimura. I was with him yesterday. He was appointed art director of the Fuller Seminary, which is a Protestant seminary up in Pasadena, Pasadena. And so he's going to be there only 3 months, because otherwise he lives in Princeton, outside of New York, with his wife. And he was, I don't know how seminary has an art director. I had never heard about that before. I wish Catholic seminary is an art director. That would be awesome. But we're not there yet, maybe in a couple of centuries. But he was appointed there, and his mission statement is just he has a studio on campus, and just be there and do his work. It's as simple as that. So it's a beautiful, beautiful job. And he's Japanese American. He was born in Boston, but he studied in Japan with Hiroshi Senju, and they're both Nihonga painters, so painting in that tradition, which goes back to 12th century Japan. We can move on to see one of his paintings. Soliloquy is this one painting from 2008. And so Makoto and I have been friends for the past 6 years or so, and when I really got to, I always loved his work, but I really started to really understand it when I went to Japan. I won't tell you the whole Japan story because that would be another 3 hours here, but anyway, I opened, Heart's Home, we told you about it. I opened a Heart's Home in northern Japan after the tsunami in Sendai, and this whole happened because of Makoto Fujimura. He's the one he was so, I still remember 4 years ago that lunch I had with him in Midtown Manhattan, and he was just back from having an exhibition in Tokyo, and he was telling me about what he saw, what he heard, what he read about young people in Japan, and he was devastated by the lack of hope. He had just read a survey where they had asked those young people in Japan, how do you picture yourself in 1 year, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And they said, beyond, I think it was 10 years, there's more than half the people were surveyed who would stop answering questions because they said it's so unlikely that we'd be alive that it's not even worth thinking about it. And then, and so many, the situation, just the lack of hope, especially among young people in Japan. And so he told me, you have to do something for Japan. You have to go to Japan. I took him seriously, and a month later I went to Japan the first time. And 2 months later I went for 1 month, and then 5 months later I went for 3 months, and we started in Japan. And what is amazing with his work, so that's Nihonga painting, so it's painted on handmade paper. It's all natural pigment, so you paint with the earth. So that would be like, the blue would be azurite, it's the most expensive. Gold is gold, the green is something else, but it's all natural pigments. They don't do chemicals or mixture. There's a precise way of doing it. And you recognize here the style of Japanese screens, with those golden squares. So it really works into that tradition, but he breaks it. And that's where his painting gets very interesting, is that he brings into, I think especially his work is beautiful everywhere, but he speaks especially to Japanese culture because he brings into Japanese art and into a very long, almost 1,000-year-old Japanese tradition, something that it's never expressed, I think, is the idea of brokenness, the idea of suffering. So he literally takes on the old Japanese style and breaks it to pieces and sort of shows what's behind the veil, behind the surface. We can move to the next one. It's even a more recent one, 2011, which he called the Tears of Christ, which was part of an exhibition he had in Chelsea. A very, very, very beautiful painting. And when you know Japanese art, and which is so orderly, so harmonious. Harmony is the big thing in Japan. Relationships have to be harmonious, art have to be harmonious. So contemporary artists, actually now I go to Japan twice a year, and I started getting to know a lot of artists, young artists in Japan. It's very hard for them to make it in Japan because contemporary art is always transgressive. They're always going to break the mold. They're always going to go further. They're always going to be surprising. And Japanese culture values harmony so much that contemporary art, it's very few galleries, it's very few collectors, it's very hard. Many of them have to leave. They have to go to Europe or to the United States. And it's a pity because Japan right now can really use a little breaking of their beautiful molds. But that's really what he does. It brings such, expressivity and freedom in his art. So we can move to the next one, which is also the last picture I want to show. It's called Walking on Water. This is a painting he made in response to the tsunami in Japan. So that idea of a wave, it's all azurite. It doesn't look like, but it's very expensive to do a painting like that because it's all precious stone that you spray on the paper. And while he was doing this painting, there was the Sandy storm in New York, and his gallery was in Chelsea, and they went, I don't know what happened, but close to, I think, some 50 of his paintings were destroyed, and he had many others, like probably 15 years worth of work or something like that was completely destroyed by Sandy. And this happened while he was doing this painting in response to the tsunami in Japan. So that was a very, I mean, it was heartbroken is too weak a words to express what he went through at that period. He had to stop working. It was traumatized, but then really understood also, like Chagall did and many others, people that we saw also, that his work was to participate in his people suffering, and he understood it. You know, people in Japan have lost everything. They lost their families, they lost their houses, they lost their land. I mean, among the people that my volunteers in Japan visit is, you know, we think about the people who died, but really the worst are for the people who didn't die, you could say. I mean, the worst, I don't know, this is very hopeless to put it like this, but think if there's some people live and they have their house, for some reason the house wasn't destroyed, was protected, but all the neighbors, like all the people they knew around them, everybody died. Like, they open the door in the morning and all they see is a big no man's land where all their friends used to live, and that's where they come to, and so that all that emptiness here is part of that experience. But it's really someone who has this very strong sense of compassion and also of bringing beauty, but not a beauty that to sort of embrace it, you have to forget that actually, oh yeah, there's such a thing as suffering, there's such a thing as evil, but let's just forget it for a moment. And not a dream beauty, but a real beauty. There was I was in Japan in August, and I talked to a photographer, and he was working with the homeless, taking pictures of the homeless, and he did a whole series of pictures of domestic violence in Japan as well. And we had this whole conversation in English, not in Japanese, about art, about his art. And he said, you know, in Japan there's so much, of course, so much beauty, so much culture of beauty, but we had a lot of, you know, dreamy beauty, which, you know, you get into it, it's fantastic, and then you step back into reality, and it hurts because it's so different. And he was telling me what we need now in Japan is a sense of real beauty. You know, beauty that's found in reality, not somewhere in your dreams, in your imagination, but something that is real, that you can touch, that you can see, that gives you hope, real hope, and that helps you face suffering. And I truly think that Makoto is not the only one, of course, but is one artist who really brings that sense of beauty, rooted in their tradition, including the whole aspect of suffering and brokenness, but bringing forward that sense of mystery, that sense of beauty. So, that's about it. I don't know if you have any questions or... Yeah, sure.
I don't have a question, but just sort of a comment. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that, and I was thinking about, not before I came, but just after hearing your discussion. I studied art in college, and a lot of the articles that we read and discussions that we had were about how artists are really self-obsessed, and like in order to be an artist you have to have this like intense self-obsession. And so I found this to be almost like the opposite and really interesting, and it just had me thinking about how maybe whoever's writing this or that discussion in literature is really confused with like the higher self and what comes through. Yeah, so I just found it like almost really inspiring to think like that being an artist isn't like a negative not that I ever thought it was negative, but I think self-obsession has a negative connotation.
Yeah, that's how I should it.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good to share.
It's interesting that you said that, because what I was thinking about was, thank you, I have to, of course, agree. I feel as if we should now have 3 hours of quiet meditation. Literally, it's such a lot. But I was thinking about these artistic pieces, these things that these people have created that we can look at now and say, look at what they were thinking about the world. You know, it gives those people something that's outside of themselves that tells their story. And I was really envious. I thought, wow, but that's not fair. Everybody needs that, you know. How do you, I mean, besides the whole sort of task or the calling that one would have as an artist to make art, it was this, to me, I felt that it was a really wonderful example of the gift of art to be a prism, you know, to be a place of study for one to see what somebody believes. And, you know, like, I mean, I don't know about how many of you are artists, but when I make a meal, or when I do hair, or when people, you know, sit and make up a curriculum or something, I mean, the work that we are called to do doesn't quite have the same sexy appeal, you know, as people who are making art. And then you can say, wow, this person's, you know, folded all these things about suffering and stuff into this work that we can stand around, large groups of people. It's like a more public way of being in the world, you know, because you're attracting, somehow it's something to look at and study. And it's a tremendous gift, and also, but a gift to that person, but a gift to the world also. Because I'm kind of grateful people don't want to do that about a meal, you know, that or whatever, you know. Anyway, discussion of work.
I kind of relate a little bit to that, and just that artistic, like where artistic comes from in people. And I think that there's some things in life that you can sort of almost pretend that you are, but I think an artist and whatever comes out of somebody that's artistic is just so raw. You just can't really, it's not artificial, like you can't fake that. It just has to be, you know, part of who someone is. And I think like you kind of described it as maybe like coming from a lonely place, because sometimes people have to withdraw and kind of energize that artistic side, but then at the same time it's really inspiring to think that after that's all said and done, how much of an influence they have on other people. That I guess, you know, respect the fact that you're trying to bring that out in them, that, you know, in that world that they live in, they're just inspiring and affecting so many people at the same time. You know, it makes me think a little bit of my own life, and just that I don't know if you're a hairdresser, but I am, and so like when you touch people on a daily basis and you're inspired to have them feel better about themselves and do that, it's like I feel kind of excited, like tomorrow going to work and being like a little bit more compassionate about sharing that talent and making them feel better.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So it just kind of puts a more personal touch on like the artistic side of things. Like we have one girl at our work that just, when it, like say their hair is processing or whatever, she just has lotion and she's just standing in front of them and giving them like a little hand massage. And it's not really expected, but nobody ever turns it down. You know?
Yeah.
It's like,
I get people hand massages all the time. I don't understand strangers. They just don't want it.
Sounds
There's,
nice.
you know, a little bit more of that compassionate side to what she's doing, you know. So it just kind of makes it a little more well-rounded for me, from what you said.
Have you read Jabber Crow by Wendell Berry? It's about a barber, and he calls like his cutting hair is like a prayer for him in this like small town. Like it's he gets to touch the heads of every person in the town.
Really?
You should really look at that book.
Who is that?
Jabber Crow is the novel. It's by Wendell Berry. Yeah.
Okay, we'll remember that.
You got it.
What he said about at least one of the artists who said he did. What about the heads? What did he? It was something heads.
Giacometti.
Oh,
Instead of a face, calling it a head.
The head.
He called
Yeah.
it a head.
Yeah. Giacometti. Yeah. Yeah. The head. Yeah.
I mean it was a connection for me because yes, I do hair and there's this head. You're looking at the head.
The real
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Father Paul, my friend Brandon and I actually come from Fuller Seminary.
Okay.
Where Marco's now, he's actually the director of the Brim Center, which is like a place that's
Yeah.
just devoted to the arts.
Yeah.
And as a student of the Brim Center for many years, I was actually really frustrated
Mm.
because it's a Protestant tradition and has for many years has focused on art as only something that happens inside sanctuaries and only something that is like religious, like
Yeah.
explicitly religious subject matter.
Yeah.
And so this kind of stuff is what really excites me.
Mm.
That's so different in its presenting face.
Mm.
So I'm curious, like, how do you negotiate that difference between the kind of classical, like, Renaissance time period, where it's like that's religious art because it's this religious subject matter, or now it's religious but not maybe necessarily in subject.
Yeah, I hear that question often, and like at your exhibition, so the exhibition I created like 2 weeks ago. So there's all these portraits of these women from Jordania, and somebody at the opening said, "Oh, did you ever think of painting the face of Jesus?" And I thought about it, and I really don't understand where that question comes from. I don't know why you would see the work that he does, and I don't know. For me, an artist has to, if he has a gift, I believe that this gift is God-given, even if it has abstraction, even if it has whatever kind of work, if it's beautiful and good, even if it's sometimes ugly, can be true, and ugliness can be true if you want to show the ugly side of humanity, or but if it's true and beautiful, then it comes from God, and you have to make sure to go all the way to that gift and not try to sort of canalize it in a direction that becomes a sort of a project and a manipulation of art. So for me, it's I really don't understand this kind of dichotomy that maybe it's true more in the Protestant world, but I must say in the Catholic world it's the same. Like the art, sort of it has to have some kind of religious content in order to be admitted in a church or to be even looked or taken seriously, which for me I really don't understand why. What's the big deal about it? Because a lot of the religious art done in the past 200 years is so mediocre, and mediocre is a weak word, and a lot of the abstract art that's been done in the past 200 years is so excellent, and I think it glorifies God a lot more than mediocre religious art. And then the artists, I mean, I found actually non-religious artists more able to express religious subjects than religious artists.
Yeah.
Like this man I was showing at the beginning, Masaru Bando, precisely because there's no sort of agenda or there's no desire to kind of create a work that's going to produce a certain kind of feelings into people, and when the work of art becomes just a means to an end. And I think as somebody like Masaru Bando who has no agenda, like he doesn't have, there's nobody ever commissioned him a pieta, is able to approach that image, that tradition with a lot more sincerity and a lot more radicality too. And I've seen also artists working the crucifixion and doing amazing things with the crucifixion, but precisely because there was no priest involved and nobody asked him anything, and so they sort of approach it, but really coming from, you know, it comes from here. It doesn't come from there. So I understand what you mean, because that's.
I mean, you're describing a tragedy. Though.
Yeah.
You're describing like a church that only values art with subject matter that's a specific way.
Yeah.
And all around, outside the sanctuary, are people who are depicting things that could revitalize what's happening inside, but it's being ignored.
Yeah. There's one priest who was very prophetic for that, for the couturier. I don't know if you've heard about him. He was a Dominican, from the Dominican order, and he was in France. He was in New York during the war. He got stuck in New York during World War II, and then moved back to France. And he was very close to Matisse, to Picasso, to Germaine Richier, to Léger. A lot of these people, extremely respectful of their work, of their gift, of their genius. And he had many of them actually work for churches, and they did amazing work with them. But precisely because he came from, you know, tremendous respect for what they were doing, and that kind of friendship. But really, yeah, we still have I remember walking in the studio of an artist once, and he told me, "You are late. I've been waiting for you for 200 years." And it's true that we've been. I mean, the church has been completely sort of. I don't know. Is it the art? You know, artists who, you know, depart from the church? Probably both ways. But it's a fact that we've been completely disconnected to the mainstream culture for 200 years, and we cannot pretend that we're going to reconnect just because we decided to reconnect. I mean, it takes also a lot of time to understand what's going on in the art world, to understand what are the concepts of artists, what they're working, their vocabulary. Takes a lot of time, and I think you have to approach that reality and to approach their work, their quest, their suffering with a lot of respect, because some of them, I mean, people like Rothko have been dealing with issues of the sacred, etc. I mean, and what happened with the Rothko chapel is actually extremely sad, because it was originally planned for a Catholic campus. I'm really ashamed to say that, but then the priests, when they saw the work, they had a bit of a fight with Dominique de Menil and decided to, I don't know exactly the details of the story, but they moved the chapel to another campus, which probably was a terrible blow for Rothko. And I think the bottom line is that they couldn't understand the work, and it was too radical, too profound for them. And they say, no, just give us something simple, you know, just give us something nice where people can know what they're dealing with. And Rothko committed suicide. I mean, it's just very, very sad what happened towards the end of the chapel. And Rothko was very, I mean, it was, even when he worked for Harvard, the Harvard murals, which they just commissioned the bodies of work, and they had no, they wasn't commissioned anything specific, and he described it as a passion and resurrection. So he was definitely already working, you know, dealing with the passion and the death of Jesus and the resurrection, like that. You could say darkness and light. It was, all his work was about that. But I feel sad that nobody, like from the church perspective, understood that at the time. But Dominique de Menil did. I mean, she really did. She was Catholic, and she had a great intelligence and approach, and was very respectful, and she trusted Rothko until the end. She said when she saw the work at the beginning, she said, "Ooh, how are we gonna explain that to the priests? It's gonna be hard." But really, she never wanted to tell him to do this or that. She really trusted him so much. And so that's yeah. Any last question or comment, or maybe Louise, do you want to wrap it up or whatever?
Yeah, I don't have anything really to add,
Mm-hmm.
but this was awesome, and thank you guys for coming, for listening, for enjoying, and for the discussion. I feel like that's like always the best part, is sharing this, but not just sharing it singularly altogether. but yeah, we still